Welcome to Be Bold America. I'm your host, Jill Cody. Be Bold America is a live bi-weekly talk show for those who are motivated to step out with the bold actions necessary to reunite this country, fight for democracy, and learn what they can keep doing, stop doing, and start doing to return to our democratic republic. Our future depends on it. Our program today is the 5 real conspiracies you need to know about. The world is awash in a deluge of dangerous conspiracy theories. While millions of people are spellbound by false conspiracy theories, the real ones that are wrecking our world go about their business unheeded. One of the most harmful results of these bogus conspiracy theories is that they help deflect people's attention from the real conspiracies that are systemically damaging billions of people around the world, destroying the living earth, and, if left unchecked, may drive our entire civilization to collapse. We have big things to do. Our bold guest today is Jeremy Lent. Jeremy is an author whose writings investigate the patterns of thought that have led our civilization to its current existential crisis. His recent book, The Patterning Instinct, A Cultural History of Humanity's Search for Meaning, explores the way humans have made meaning of the cosmos from hunter-gatherer times to the present day. Jeremy is founder of the nonprofit Leology Institute, dedicated to fostering an integrated worldview that could enable humanity to thrive sustainably on the earth. It is such a pleasure to have you on the program again, Jeremy. Welcome back to Be Bold America.
Thank you so much, Jill. It's a pleasure to be with you again and to have another conversation with you.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. And I was thinking, Jeremy, before we delve into the 5 real conspiracies we all need to know about, would you take a minute and tell us about the Leology Institute? And am I saying that properly?
You are. You're
good.
saying it great, and thanks, because oftentimes people get that. It's one of those tricky words to pronounce. Well, it's a nonprofit that I set up some years ago to really foster a different kind of worldview, a different way of making sense of the world than the one that is we take for granted nowadays and that is driving our civilization to collapse, basically. And the word leology actually comes from a traditional Chinese word, li, which means the principles that connect everything in the universe. And so the idea behind leology is it's like the ology part is like a study of. So it's like really an embodied study of the principles that connect all of us and connect all things around us. And so it's very much a worldview of integration that it tries to foster.
Well, that is very exciting. I may have to join. Talking about principles and what connects us all is, I think more important now than ever. In your article, which I read, the 5 real conspiracies you need to know about, in your article, you began back in 1947. Would you walk us through that background?
Yes, for sure. Well, this was the first of the 5 that kind of kicked off in 1947, which is this fascinating thing, because it's like a real-life conspiracy in the sense that it's a small group of white men, white elder men meeting together at this place in Switzerland called Mont Pelerin, like a luxury resort. And they set up this society called the Mont Pelerin Society. And its whole purpose was to spread the ideology of neoliberalism through the world. And what's amazing is back in 1947, when they set it up, and then the 10 or 20 years following that, their ideas seemed absolutely fanatical and crazy to almost anybody. Their ideas were that you should dismantle regulations of society, that the concept of individual liberty should be the only thing that eclipses all other considerations of things like fairness, justice, anything like that. But what is so amazing is it was really one of the most successful conspiracies of the modern world, in that within 3 decades, they had infiltrated their ideas through academic institutions, political centers of power, media, all over the world, so that by the time Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher got elected, right there in the kind of late 1970s, their ideas had been sort of preformed for them through all this work that it got done. So now, what we've now taken as granted now over 3 decades of these ideas going around the world, these crazed fanatical ideas have now become mainstream. Ideas that there should be a market in everything, that even things like education or things that are truly like part of this great human creation of meaningful value we've done through community over millennia should be transferred to some marketplace, as if it's some sort of as if kids' minds should be just traded like gold bullion.
Well, one thing is I wanted to define neoliberalism because many people are confused because liberalism is in it, but it's really conservatism, isn't it?
I know it gets kind of complicated. The whole thing about neoconservative, neoliberal, liberal, and all that stuff.
Right.
Basically, the word neoliberalism, it was defined really to talk about a new kind of liberalism, and really the idea about liberalism really was just kind of riffing off 19th century ideas about freedom and individual liberty. And the idea of neoliberalism is that it took some really good ideas about how people should be free to express their beliefs, whether about religion or about political different views, all that kind of stuff. And it took this concept of individual liberty and made it the all-encompassing idea that everything should be sort of subsidiary to. And they came up with this kind of theory that Milton Friedman did a great job of getting into like mainstream economics now, which is that somehow if you just let individuals do whatever they want, regardless of any constraints, this actually ends up being the best thing for society. It leads to this kind of free market where everything gets proportionally distributed in the most efficient way. And what's interesting about their whole idea is that as they got to be successful and centers of power and big corporations realized where the sort of power was in politics, their very ideas themselves got kind of shifted because we no longer even have a free market. We basically have a market that is mostly driven by oligopolies, where massive corporations essentially just buy themselves into power. And the ability for people to actually be free in their choices and what they do has been hugely constrained. So one of the great ironies is that the very thing that they claim to be behind, their success has undermined.
Oh, that is stunning. Well, then, the first conspiracy you have here is a conspiracy to turn the world into a giant marketplace for the benefit of the wealthy elite. I know you touched on that, but tell us more.
Well, so that really is this Mont Pelerin Society conspiracy. And so we've described this kind of ideology behind it. And because what we haven't touched on is how successful it's been in the world at large and the terrible destructive effects it's had on everyone. So through this belief system in individual liberty that then goes into free marketplace, that then becomes part of the political dominance, they've managed to cripple trade unions, like social safety nets that used to be considered to be an essential part of a civilized society, just torn up. There's this crazed idea that somehow you should keep reducing tax rates for the wealthy. And so we're in this world now where you have these mega billionaires, and it's so extreme that it's hard to sort of get your head around this, but the wealthiest 26 people in the world, these billionaires, own as much wealth as half the entire world's population. And that statistic was actually from a couple of years ago. Right now, I'm sure the number is even fewer than that. And what happens is it's this process that has developed now where the wealth accumulates, the wealth empowers more wealth. So the gap between in fact, I have a graph in this article, the top 0.01% of the country versus the bottom 90% has massively increased. That gap is about 8 times larger than it was back in the early 80s. As a result of this incredible this inequality that we really have never even seen in history. I mean, it's somewhat equivalent to the robber barons of the early 20th century, but it's really gotten so extreme, it's even more out of control than that with these mega billionaires. And of course, with COVID, that number has increased even more. Like, there's been a roughly 30% increase in the wealth of these mega billionaires right now, even while we've had 200,000 plus Americans have died from coronavirus, and something like 50 million have lost their jobs.
Well, it also sounds, the Montpelier, am I pronouncing that correctly? Montpelier
Right.
Society.
Mm-hmm.
It also sounds very Ayn Randian, which is a Republican
Absolutely.
mentor.
Yes, and she was very much connected with some of the people from this Montpelier Society. I don't know if she was ever actually a member, but there's no question her novels and her ability to sort of get people emotionally invested in these ideas was a significant part of their success.
Oh, boy. Well, then, so the second conspiracy is by transnational corporations to turn billions of people into addicts.
Yes, and for this one, we need to go back even further in time, really to the 1920s or so, when the United States began to foster this idea of consumerism, which was really a brand new idea that had never really existed in the world until that time. And what they did was they wanted to use the fact of people becoming consumers and try to make as much money as they could for their clients, who were corporations, some of whom became these great transnationals now. But what was so fascinating is this particular conspiracy I'm talking about was one that was led by somebody called Edward Bernays, who it turns out was actually Sigmund Freud's nephew. So Sigmund Freud at that time was just coming out with these new ideas about psychoanalysis and looking at the deep unconscious of human beings, brand new ideas. And he was a deeply ethical person. But this nephew of his, Edward Bernays, took his ideas and got so excited about this realization that he could use them to manipulate people's unconscious, to get them to do things that they wouldn't otherwise want to do. So they talked about we can shift people. We can shift the culture of America so people can be trained to desire, to want new things, even before the others have been actually consumed. And so his partner talked about we must shape a new mentality. And the mentality was that men's desires must overshadow their needs. So they were quite clear, and they sort of signed on many sort of deadly corporations as their clients, that they were, in the words of Bernays, actually the sort of unseen, like an invisible government that's the true ruling power of this country, molding people's minds, forming their tastes, pulling the wires that control the public mind. And Bernays was the one who really got this notion of marketing as we know it today going, where basically marketing is designed not to tell people that there's a new product out there that helps them, that basically is a better mousetrap or a car that drives further with more fuel efficiency or whatever. But what marketing is really about is getting to people's deep unconscious needs. As human beings, we've evolved with needs, either for physical needs like sugar or salt or whatever that might be, or cultural needs, like we need to feel status in community. We need to feel respected. We don't want to feel insecure. So those are the things they target in people to manipulate them to do things against their better interests, just to make money. And we're so used to it now that we don't sort of take it for granted. Well, isn't that what the world is about? But these were brand new ideas that Bernays came up with in the 1920s.
Well, I have a thought about that, but I'll pick up after our station ID. You're listening to Be Bold America on KSQD 90.7 FM. Many voices, one station. Listen worldwide online from the KSQD.org homepage, Catch up on previous Be Bold America programs by visiting our KSQD webpage or subscribe to our podcast by using your favorite podcast platform. I'm your host, Jill Cody.
KSQD thanks the following recent donors who support our programming in this difficult time: Douglas Holzman, Albert McKinney, Sandra Chirk, Rachel Goodman, Rebecca Royston, and Karen Ehrlich. You inspire us to give our very best at 90.7 FM. May you also inspire others to donate on our website, ksqd.org.
Today, our topic is the 5 real conspiracies you need to know about. We're speaking with Jeremy Lent, author of The Patterning Instinct, A Cultural History of Humanity's Search for Meaning, and who has an upcoming book titled The Web of Meaning, Integrating Science and Traditional Wisdom to Find Our Place in the Universe. To learn more, visit jeremylent.com. That's JEREMYLENT.com. So, Jeremy, what I was going to pick up on is that as you were talking about with marketing, an entire advertising industry has been built around this. And I know they even use brain science to try to get to those endorphins. And if I think people that have had children, very early age, you get the buy me that. This is programmed when they're toddlers. Correct?
That is completely true. And again, that's where this kind of conditioning of the brain is so powerful that as little kids, we don't know better. And as we get older, we sort of think that this is what life is about, is just to consume and to sort of have status through our products as a result of that. In fact, there's this amazing quote from somebody who was the chief executive of General Mills, where he got caught saying, basically, when it comes to targeting kid consumers, we at General Mills believe in getting them early and having them for life.
Oh, wow.
It's so scary, and this is what they do. And it's even worse outside of the United States in many ways, because in other countries in the global South, people may be a little bit less sophisticated and in sort of, or more vulnerable, basically, to this kind of power of this mind control. So in South Asia now, it's estimated that half of the children are either undernourished or overweight because of this advertising that tells them to spend what little money they have, on junk food, basically, just like this General Mills CEO intended. And to your point about the sort of deep psychology, really with the rise now of the internet as a way to manipulate people's minds, this consumer marketing that's been around for a century has now become even more powerful, sort of individually targeted to each person. And there's even an actual lab that's been developed not far from where you are in Stanford, where this somebody who's like a sort of modern-day Bernays, if you will. His name is B.J. Fogg, and he's somebody who created this kind of ominously named Stanford Persuasive Technology Lab, where he teaches these new tech people who end up creating the apps that now dominate our lives, how to infiltrate themselves into our minds so we get addicted to those kind of like buttons, and how to get us just enough sort of interactive so that our sort of dopamine hormones sort of go through our body every time we see the like thing, and then we feel bad because we've left out for a few minutes. And for kids growing up now, this kind of reality is the only one that they know, with a potentially massive impact on the quality of their lives and the quality of our society. There's actually a great documentary film out that I'm sure some people have seen called The Social Dilemma.
Yes, that's excellent.
Which goes into this in quite some depth, and I really recommend to anybody, especially anybody who has children,
yes,
where they want to really realize how much they need to protect against it. And one of the fascinating things that comes out of that is the people who developed these really kind of creepy technologies, they are the ones who are most assiduous to say their kids don't go anywhere close to social media. They don't let them anywhere close because they know how dangerous it is.
Wow, that's quite a life to be living, not really living in alignment there. Do as I say, not as I do kind of thing.
Exactly.
And the bottom line for this is really making a profit, consumerism, the advertising industry and going after people's the brain science to be able to addict people, whether it's to an app or to a food product. It turns us into a product. The human being is now a product for them, right?
You're so right, Jill. I'm really glad you bring that up, because the thing we have to look at, it's easy enough to say, oh, the internet is bad, or Facebook is bad, or all these things. But actually, that's not even the case. The internet itself is a tool, is a vehicle for good or bad. But we have to look at the context, and the underlying context of all of this stuff, from Bernays to the General Mills to modern internet, is the capitalist economy that all of these two new technologies arise in. And so even if many of these technologists who created these products and the social media powers, they were thinking that they were doing good. They were excited about the possibility of connecting the world and actually really cared about making the world a better place. But as soon as you try to develop any technology or any idea within the for-profit capitalist system, where basically you end up with shareholders who demand continual increase in profit, any ethical beliefs you have, any desire to do good, ultimately gets thrown out the window because you just don't have a choice other than to optimize for your shareholders. And that's the thing that ultimately we need to take the look at most closely. It's kind of the elephant in the room, because it's so around us. It's been around us for so many decades now that people don't even think there is an alternative to the way to structure society. But there are alternatives. And one of the most valuable things we can do is recognize that this is the underlying system, that it can corrupt just about anything as soon as it rises within that place where the shareholders want to make more money from whatever it is.
Wow. Well, then the third conspiracy is to plunder the global South for the benefit of the global North. What do you mean by that?
Yes, right. Well, this one, we've been going sort of further and further back in history for some of these conspiracies. And this one really goes all the way back to almost 500 years ago, if you can believe it. And it began with what was called the Treaty of Saragossa, all the way back in 1529, between Spain and Portugal. And they met, and they agreed that they wouldn't battle with each other as they're beginning to develop these ships that could sort of travel the world. But what they would do is they'd carve up the whole world they sort of drew a line on the map, and they said, okay, Portugal, you get this part, which is basically Eastern Africa and Southeast Asia, and Spain gets that part, which is essentially the Americas. And it was a conspiracy to basically plunder anything they could find outside of the European zone among any society that didn't have the ability to defend themselves for their own wealth. Now, you could argue it's not exactly technically a conspiracy in the sense that it wasn't like this kind of secret, like we sort of generally think of conspiracies, and I accept that. But it was a conspiracy in the sense that it was this notion of these powerful groups getting together and working out how they are going to damage, basically heedless to any kind of ethical interest, how they're going to exploit, damage, and plunder essentially any other part of the world outside of where they lived.
Now, it may have started 500 years ago with the treaty. What did you call the treaty again?
It was called the Treaty of Saragossa.
Saragossa.
And, not many people know about that nowadays, but at that time it was a legally binding treaty, and they were incredibly successful. And what they did was the Portuguese in Southeast Asia, they just kind of plundered and they disrupted systems that had been going on there for centuries. And the thing to understand, it wasn't even that they had superior technology compared to, say, the Chinese or other advanced groups in Southeast Asia, but nobody was ready for a different kind of ethical system, this system of absolute exploitation, of just breaking rules, just basically doing anything, cheating, lying, killing, just to make money. And to the Portuguese, that was what she did. And people was just it just wasn't part of the normal, like any way of thinking about that's what humans do. And that's why they were so successful. And of course, when Spain came to what they called the New World, which wasn't so new for the people who had lived there for many thousands of years.
Right.
There, they did have the benefit of superior technology, and again, just a mindset that the people in those countries couldn't even begin to think about. So Montezuma in Mexico, when Cortez came there, they invited them into their city because it just didn't occur to them that they could be so treacherous that they would then sort of turn on them when their guard was down, because that's not even the way. I mean, they had wars, but they conducted wars in a sense of honor and a sense of you do things in a certain way. And this kind of European approach to total exploitation above anything else was something that they just weren't ready for.
Well, it started 500 years ago, but it seems like it's still occurring today. I mean, we've had thousands and thousands of refugees coming to this country from Central American countries and countries in the South that have been ruined, and I think many have been because our country has exploited their resources, and they're very difficult to live in, where the gangs have taken over and the governments aren't very strong, or the governments are corrupt. So are we still seeing this today?
We are, Jill, and I'm really glad you mentioned that, because it's not just a matter, it is important to understand the history, but it's not just one for the history books, because really, ever since the Second World War, we sort of feel we're living in a more civilized society maybe than back in those days, centuries ago. But the reality is that the U.S., the British, and the French, through the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, instituted this world order that continues to suck wealth out of the global South. And that's one of the things that's really hard to get our heads around, because we're so used to talking about, how much aid should the global North give these countries that we sort of think of as the developing countries, as if they need to sort of develop to sort of where we're at. The reality is they got ransacked by the global North over centuries. And now you have things like the World Bank, the IMF, the World Trade Organizations, all controlled by the wealthy countries of the global North that set terms of trade and actually force these other countries in the global South to do things basically according to what the global North wants, according to rules that the transnational corporations put down, to continue to flow wealth from the South to the North. It's estimated that roughly $3 trillion a year actually flows from the South to the North in net global flows. So even right now, every year, the South gets even poorer at the expense of the wealthy countries in the North. And
that's why we're seeing the refugees at our borders by the thousands. It's just stunning. If you're just joining us, you're listening to Be Bold America on KSQD 90.7 FM. Our topic is the 5 real conspiracies you need to know about. And we're speaking with Jeremy Lent, founder of the Leology Institute and author of The Patterning Instinct, A Cultural History of Humanity's Search for Meaning. I'm your host, Jill Cody.
Hello, K-Squid listeners. I'm Tom Hartman, and each weekday at 4 p.m., I bring you a different perspective on the news than you're likely to hear on most media outlets. Please join me on KSQD Santa Cruz, your ink spot on the dial for the Tom Hartman program, heard now for the first time ever in the Monterey Bay area at 90.7 FM, weekdays at 4 p.m. That's Progressive Talk and Conversation with me, Tom Hartman, weekdays at 4 p.m. on KSQD 90.7 FM. Tag, you're it.
Now, back to our bold and impressive guest, Jeremy Lent. Well, now we're on conspiracy number 4, conspiracy to hide the effects of climate breakdown for corporate profit.
Yes, well, this one is a slightly more recent than the others we've talked about, and in many ways is the most sort of dastardly, heinous conspiracy, if you will, of all of them, because it has been devised so cynically, and the people who are responsible for it, some of them still alive in positions of power, and really, but in any sort of moral society, they should be jailed for the rest of their lives. So this is the one of the fossil fuel executives who actually knew about the reality of climate change being human-induced as far back as 1968. So that's something like over 50 years ago, and they deliberately concealed this knowledge, and they deliberately confused and obfuscated the whole public discussion on it so that they could basically rake in trillions of dollars over these decades at the expense of our whole living Earth, at the expense of the future of humanity, risking the future of civilization, and the horrendous destruction of the natural world, and to, like you say, the global climate refugees that are just beginning now and will only increase in the future. So the actual moral heinousness of this is something that is hard to even comprehend.
I'm aware of what you're talking about with Exxon executives, and it just makes me livid every time I hear about it. So conspiracy number 5 is to grow the global economy indefinitely.
Yes, and that one, if you wanted to be literal about the sort of conspiracy word, you could say, well, to what extent is this a conspiracy? But it is, in a way, is in the sense that we have to recognize that we are all part of this kind of conspiracy of silence, if you will, to not be focusing on the biggest issue that is putting at risk, the entire flourishing of future human generations, and actually is even causing the 6th great extinction of species on Earth since life began billions of years ago, but this one as a result of our human activities. So really what we can describe it as is a conspiracy to sort of not do the things that we need to do, to not change our society in the deepest ways that need to be changed in order to preempt the destruction that we're accelerating to. I'm happy to go into some of those details of what I'm talking about if you want.
Yes, go right ahead.
Want to go on that.
Yes, please do.
Well, I think one of the things that we need to realize, like so much of the sort of media conversations we have, or just the things we're looking at day to day, even when they're really important, things like what is the new Democratic administration going to do in the next few years in terms of, shifting the unfairness of our society, or, changing policies or whatever. We have to recognize that as long as we are living in a global economy that continues to believe in growing from one year to the next at an exponential rate, and as long as our society is based on this kind of growth imperative and the imperative of shareholders to continue to increase their returns from their corporate investments one year to the next, we are literally destroying the living Earth. And there was a report just recently that the World Wildlife Fund put out, which tells us that 68% of animal populations have declined. There's been a decline of 68% in the past 50 years. And if you look at some places like just North, and if you look at South America as a continent, their animal populations have declined 94% in the last 50 years. We're really looking at this shift of human domination of the natural world to such an extreme way that the living Earth is barely surviving. And what's so astonishing is that the global gross domestic product, like all the stuff that gets produced and consumed around the world, which is responsible for this, is actually expected to triple by 2060. So, I mean, if we're looking at this much destruction right now and tripling this, well, many people, more and more, are saying that our civilization is headed for collapse at this rate. And some people argue, well, actually, maybe we should focus on this concept of green growth. You know, there's got to be a way to use technology so we can still keep growing, but reduce our impact on the environment. And that's really just been shown to be a myth. The reality is that we have to look at these stark realities. We have to say that our society has to shift to a different kind of society that is not based on wealth accumulation, that's not based on economic growth, but is based on things that would lead us to be much happier. Basically, the quality of life, the quality of our community, rather than just buying more.
Well, you're leading right into a listener question I got. And the question was, why, given the long-term historical ties you bring to your thoughts, why, despite this, we continue to spiral into a grim future that no one, not even Republicans, well, mostly Republicans, want? Why is there too little attention paid to how and why, despite all the knowledge and science and common sense we bring to these issues?
What a great question. And thank you so much to whoever asked that. And I think that one major reason why is that the kind of short-term profit focus on domination and exploitation that we've been talking about, that went all the way back to Western European ideas 500 years ago, has become the dominant mode of thought and the dominant way in which our society works right now, so that we don't even realize that there are other options. And I think a large part of that is because the corporate-owned media only focuses our attention on the short term. They want more profits, and so they focus on things that will make us sort of interested in something the next day or the next week or the next month at most. Shareholders just want short-term profits. So it's this kind of deep short-term thinking embedded into our society. And I think ultimately we have to recognize that as long as these transnational corporations dominate our entire, not just the economy, but our media and global governance, and through corruption at this point that dominate most actual national governments, the changes we need will not happen. They will only happen once enough of us actually start feeling into the needs of future generations. We'll start looking at our own grandchildren and actually start realizing that they are going to be growing up in a world that could be just so devastating that the quality of their lives might never be able to reach out to the sort of the positive experiences that we've had in the past few decades, and realize that for their benefit and for the benefit of all life on Earth, we have to shift some of these structures that we just take for granted now.
Well, to bring this to democracy, none of these 5 conspiracies, none of them seem to foster democracy, right?
Right. I think that's absolutely true. I mean, every one of them are very much against democracy. But I think it's also important to really think about what we even mean by that word democracy. Yes. Mm-hmm. Because, of course, even if, I mean, right now, of course, anybody who cares about democracy is breathing a sigh of relief in the fact that we don't have basically a fascist coup takeover as the United States right now that many of us were afraid of. But this is, for starters, we don't even know how much we have a brief window where we could try to change something around, but unless we start doing things differently, we might be looking at a similar risk 4 or 8 years from now. But even what we call a democracy right now has been purchased by the big corporations.
Yes.
The very notion of corporate personhood, this idea of a corporation which really, if it were a person, would have to be recognized as being a psychopath, with just this one aim, one goal of maximizing profit above anything else. And in human terms, that the name for that kind of person is a psychopath. But these psychopathic entities are given the power to basically buy the political results that they want, and by owning the media, and even if we have even something close to a fair vote, which we're so many steps away because of the gerrymandering and all, the constitutional structures that don't even allow a majority of Americans to actually win, to sort of get the person that they want. But even if those things were changed, the mindset that arises from the local radio stations owned by, say, Sinclair Network, for example, which has bought up radio stations across the country and gives them lines that the news broadcasters have to speak.
Propaganda. It's their propaganda.
Nothing other than that.
That's right.
And that's what has led, of course, to so many of these divisions in our society, where the very sense of reality that much of our society has is so far from objective reality that it's as if we're living in a world of mass delusion. So there's many, many steps that we need to take to move back to the potential for real democracy. And so I think it's important as I call these out, not to sort of tear our hair out in despair, but to recognize that every one of these steps we need to look at, and we need to sort of block and tackle, and we need to recognize that the path back to real democracy has to go through each of those steps.
Well, and I would be remiss if I didn't bring up QAnon, because it is a recent phenomenon, conspiracy, that is just wild, internet-based. I mean, they don't even know who's started this. It could be a Russian bot back in 2017. And so why are these conspiracy theories like QAnon have become so powerful? Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think actually it comes down to a lot of these other real conspiracies that we've been talking about. So, for example, the fact of the neoliberalism that has really destroyed the safety net of economies and caused so many people to really live lives of economic despair, leaves people just so frustrated and wanting to look for a reason why. But because the corporate media is designed to not let them know that it's what the real reasons are for this, then they'll turn to any kind of answer, because we have what I call a patterning instinct as human beings. We have to find some way of patterning meaning into things that go wrong. So that's one big reason. And then on top of that, of course, is the silos, the sort of cultural silos that have been created through the social media, that once again have been done not because it has to be that way, but because they're profit-based. And so they've learned that actually false news actually gets more clicks, like multiple times more clicks than real news. So they allow that to happen in order to sell more advertising dollars, and which has led to this creation of absolute silos of different realities, even when the objective reality is there and available for people if they want to actually look more deeply. So I think these are some of the reasons, along with there's a sense of existential despair. People have this feeling of how we're heading towards disaster, but because it's not so easy to actually express that and understand what the reasons are, it's very easy to just follow any kind of crazed delusional nonsense that at least gives you a sense of some level of security.
And community, too. I think that, they've created another tribe, and so that they get a sense of purpose and meaning from that.
Yes, well said. Completely agree.
You're listening to Be Bold America on KSQD 90.7 FM. Many voices, one station. Listen globally online from the ksqd.org homepage, or listen to the show's podcast at Be Bold America's webpage. I'm your host, Jill Cody.
This Sunday on KSQD, join State of Mind for part 2 of our series on racism and mental health. We again hear directly from Black community members as they discuss how access to physical and mental health support could be improved for people of color. Psychologist Robert Barty speaks with activist Joy Flynn, educator and musician Lisa Taylor, and educator and activist Jason Seals as they share insights gleaned from their personal and professional experiences in our community. They explore how mental health systems are typically unsafe, culturally inappropriate, and invalidating for Blacks and people of color. They offer alternative approaches to supporting wellness, along with suggestions for how professionals can improve the accessibility of their services. That's State of Mind, Sunday evening at 6 p.m. here on K-Squid 90.7 FM and ksqd.org.
Today, our topic is the 5 real conspiracies you need to know about. And we're speaking with Jeremy Lent, author of the upcoming book, The Web of Meaning, Integrating Science and Traditional Wisdom to Find Our Place in the Universe, and the founder of the Leology Institute. To learn more, visit jeremylent.com. So, Jeremy, in the last 10, 12 minutes we have together, it's gone by so fast. What would you suggest listeners keep doing, stop doing, start doing as they relate to the conspiracies that you've written about?
Right, sure. Well, thanks. I think that's so great that you ask these questions, and that's what really matters. And, well, what I would suggest to listeners to keep doing, and I have a feeling that that the people who listen to this radio station are people who are already doing this, so keep doing it, is keep an open mind and really try to understand what is actually happening in the world around us. Actually try to look more deeply than whatever the media is telling you that day. Keep questioning what are these kind of power blocks that are causing these problems, and really ask yourself, like, what is it that we can do in relation to that? So I think that sort of sense of keeping engaged, keeping curious about what's going on, is so important to do.
And what should listeners stop doing?
Well, I think that one thing we should stop doing is it's quite easy to demonize the people who do follow some sort of QAnon conspiracy, or there's many people that we might know who might have sort of following the sort of pandemic type conspiracy, and saying, oh, this whole COVID thing is just here to make money for the pharmaceutical companies, or we shouldn't trust the vaccines. It's just going to make Bill Gates more wealthy. All these kind of things where there is some tiny sliver of truth in some of these things, and then a total amounts of falsehood, which causes really real difficulty. But it's very easy to demonize these people and go, oh my God, I can't believe how crazy they are, and that doesn't help anything. That just increases the separation in our society. So I think what's so important is to call out these false conspiracy theories for what they are, but recognize that the people who are getting behind them are hurting, that they're frightened by what's going on around them in life in general, by the pandemic, probably feeling very insecure about their economic situation, and in so many ways are getting tormented by the very powers that are dominating our society. So I think by stopping that kind of othering of those people and feeling into trying to reach them from a compassionate place, looking for our shared humanity, I think is one of the most important things to do.
Well, demonizing is a tool that is so successful. And in your conspiracies, the 5 conspiracies and the 26 people that own half of the entire world's population wealth, and the others that are in plundering the global south and so on, do they need to demonize themselves to get what they want? Is there a demonization going on to keep these conspiracies alive?
I think that there is. I think that one of the, if we sort of just look at it in terms of just as othering, what we kind of see is people can only really maintain being able to look at themselves in the mirror when they are actively part of doing harm by sort of separating out other people from their own sense of empathic orbit, and basically saying, just sort of basically closing off to the harm that is being done. And that can be closing off to the harms being done to other humans or just other living creatures on this earth that we share with them. So I do think that kind of othering is a major part of the sort of fundamental shift that we need to, that we kind of need to move on. So, I mean, in a way, this kind of, we could have that lead to your final... The third part.
Yes.
Like, what can we start doing is really start to kind of increase or expand our own sense of who we are, of our sense of identity, to really begin to connect compassionately with other people around us, beyond the people that we're just used to sort of feeling are part of our circle, like our close friends or our family, but to recognize, we're part of community, to recognize that we are part of all of humanity. And, when we're not separate from these things. So if we're living an affluent life, and we're just kind of going around saying, well, it's really bad what's happening out there, but it's not me, I'm not doing it, to recognize that part of that affluence has these impacts on the lives of other people with whom we share, our species, and other people who feel and have and go through pain and suffering and fear just like we do. And then to expand that even beyond that to all of life, and to just recognize that, we actually share big chunks of our DNA, not just with other mammals, but like insects and plants and all of life. We all have this shared common ancestor. The life that has evolved on this earth over billions of years is what has given us the ability to experience this kind of richness of this beautiful world we live in today. And so we sort of, once you expand your identity to include all of life, you begin to really feel the sense of reciprocity, and not just feel like, oh, I should get involved in stopping all this environmental destruction because, it's something I just kind of should do. But you actually start to feel that something I want to do. It's something that I'm driven to do because this is happening to me as part of life. And I think that's that kind of that shift that we, as individuals and as a global society, need to experience over the next period of time to kind of change the direction around of where our civilization's headed.
Well, you're kind of segueing into something that I wanted to tell you, and then also ask you a question. I have been thinking about Be Bold America's purpose, and we've been on there in February it'll be 2 years. And, the purpose was to look at reuniting this country and saving our democracy. And I feel that my show needs a shift. Biden's been elected. I know that we have a long way to go, and we're not out of the woods, and we could lose our democracy in 4 or 8 years. But I do feel that I need a shift. So what I'm looking at to launch on Valentine's Day, actually, next year, is to shift the purpose of Be Bold America from discussing how to reunite the country to discussing issues that, discussing principles and tools to create more personally meaningful and politically active lives, because a bold democratic America first requires bold and principle-centered citizens. And so I wanted to start talking about how individuals can create a more meaningful life, how they can look at being principle-centered instead of anger-centered or enemy the Democrat is the enemy centered, or money centered, greed centered, all those things that have you put your principles, your principles just evaporate, as you've been talking about with some of the conspiracies. The corporations would be psychopath. The people in them have just given up any personal principles to work in them. So I was going to ask you your thoughts on that, as well as what personal principles do you live by, Jeremy? What do you stand for? I mean, we can certainly hear it in your interview here, and we also know from your books, but anything more you'd like to add?
Oh, thank you so much for asking that question, Jill. And I just want to say first, I'm absolutely thrilled to hear about that shift in your sort of mission of where you're going.
Thank you.
And I think that very notion of meaning and living a life of meaning, to me, that's been the sort of central focus of my life since I really went through a whole sort of spiritual crisis some years back in my life, but to really live my life in what's truly meaningful, which I believe, and in my upcoming book, actually, The Web of Meaning, I talk about this a lot, but I see it as meaning itself as being a function of connectedness with all things, with all parts of our own life, with community, and with life on Earth. And so, in fact, to answer your second question about what is it, what I see as sort of what really drives my sense of meaning.
Yes.
Well, I can tell you, I'm sitting here in my studio at home right now, and I'm looking at a framed kind of picture with a statement on it or a question on it that I have on my wall that I look at all day as I'm working on my computer and doing interviews or whatever. And it says this, it says, "What can I do for the greatest benefit of all life?" And that, honestly, is how my intention for myself. I'm not saying that, I'm a human being like all of us and don't necessarily do all the things that I want, but my whole deepest intention is to live my life in that way, to recognize that all of us, that we are life. Life is in us, in the trillions of cells within our bodies, that we are actually, we are here as a result of life's evolution on this earth. And it's not just that we owe it to life to do what we can for life, but we owe it to ourselves because that's ultimately who we are. And once we recognize that we're living in a civilization that is systematically destroying ourselves in that way, it leads us to just want to get up every morning and just put ourselves into the kind of struggle for life against some of these forces that are destroying it.
Well, it is just so powerful and such a joy and honor to have you on the program, Jeremy. We do live in an interdependent world, and I think most of us, a lot of us keep thinking we're independent and not interdependent. And I also wanted to say to our listeners that there is a conspiracy handbook that was created by Bristol University, and if anybody wants one, just email me here at the station. I'd be happy to email it to you. I want to thank Be Bold America's program engineer, Emily Donham, to give another big, huge thank you to today's terrific and bold guest, Jeremy Lent. Thank you, Jeremy.
Well, thank you, Jill. It's been great talking with you today.
Next time on Sunday, December 20th, will be a best of Be Bold America. Has Trump created the largest cult in America? We'll hear from world-renowned expert on undue influence in cults, Stephen Hassan, and from award-winning journalist Tony Rossomano, who earned the Edward R. Murrow Award for his international reporting of the Jamestown tragedy. That's Sunday, December 20th at 5 p.m. Don't miss it. You're listening to KSQD 90.7 FM Santa Cruz. Many voices, one station. My name is Jill Cody, and thank you for listening to Be Bold America. Until next time, keep, stop, start.